Marhaban, welcome back. All right, we have some spots on our chart. Now we come to what is everybody's favorite letter of the Arabic alphabet by far. This is the champion. We're going to learn the letter ghayn. Okay, and we've saved this one for near to the last because it can be a bit intimidating. But by this time, you've made a lot of progress, and there's no need to be afraid of the letter ghayn. Okay, so I'm going to write it here in our chart. Now, ghayn does not have it's definitely a hard letter, an emphatic letter, and it definitely involves the stretching of the throat coming from the bottom of the throat. It doesn't really have a soft equivalent. Basically, the equivalent would be like pronouncing a vowel sound by itself with this. And ghayn can be confusing because a lot of people will confuse the vowels that go with it with the sound it makes. Okay, so ghayn is a little bit difficult to explain. We don't have a letter for this in English, but as challenging as it may be, I can guarantee you have made this sound and you do it without thinking and without difficulty. It's just when you think too much, it becomes a little bit difficult. So if you remember what we did with ha, remember how we sort of pulled our tongue back, sort of stretched our throat muscles and made the the breath. Imagine doing that without the breath. So remember with we could fog up a mirror. Imagine doing that and not fogging up the mirror. Now, ghayn by itself, if there were no vowels on it, you really wouldn't be able to hear it. But what it does is it has the effect, like all of these hard sounds, of making the vowel sound deeper. Okay? And it's a very distinctive Arabic sound. So probably the easiest way to remember this, and I might be dating myself a bit here, if we think about the famous actor, Austrian actor, who starred in The Terminator and who was governor of California for a while. You know this person, Mr. Schwarzenegger. All right, if I asked you what his name is, what are you going to say? All right, the name of Mr. Schwarzenegger is Arnold. All right, Arnold. No one would say Arnold from here, right? How does he say his name? Arnold. Ah, ah, ah. That is the sound that ghayn makes. We don't have an ghayn in English, but when Mr. Schwarzenegger says his name, Arnold, he's making an ghayn sound. And that's probably the easiest way to remember it. Okay, so that's the sound. We have some exercises so you'll get used to hearing the difference in it, but you're really going to hear the difference in what it does to the vowels around it. Now, how do we write this? Well, the writing part is somewhat easier, and I'll tell you there is a good deal of variation in how this is written. So this one we want to start with the final form. Okay, so it has a little bit of a loop, kind of like a C, like you're beginning to do maybe a backwards 2, and then a much larger loop underneath the line. Notice the bottom one is much bigger than the top one. This is an ghayn by itself. Okay, why is that important? Because this is going to be the base for what we do with the other forms. So probably the easiest way to explain what would happen with this at the beginning of a word is, obviously we're going to cut this loop off on the bottom. I mean, we can't connect this to something because we're going this way. So ghayn typically at the beginning of a word is going to look something like that. Okay, and there's a lot of variation, individual writing, how people do this. But you notice it's basically this top part here with the bottom cut off, and it will continue. Now what we have to be careful is we don't confuse it with some other things we know. So notice this is curving, and it's not going above the center line here. So, for example, this letter, right, the kaf, looks very different. But if I make a sloppy kaf or a sloppy ayn, I make this one too big, not quite curving, and I make this not distinctly broken, these two are going to be confused. Okay? So this is ein at the beginning of a word. Now, in the middle of a word, it's actually simpler. Something like this. Right? It looks like a triangle. And here, very important, notice I have the angles. Don't want to make this a loop, okay? Because you could imagine what happens if instead of making sharp angles and making this a triangle, I kind of make them, curving. Now we're starting to confuse with a meme, we're starting to confuse with a sod, we're starting to confuse with a cough without the dots. Confusing, okay? It's a sharp triangle shape. One variation, though, is a lot of people will put this in the middle of a word. You will see that with this in the middle of a word, but this is typically the way it ends. Now, this shape, how did we get this triangle shape? This probably comes from people connecting into this and not wanting to lift the pen off, because the final form starts off the same, and I do that. See how it's basically this, but I've done it all in one motion? That's probably where we get this from. So you can see the common elements in this letter. But this closure here is important because I don't want to confuse it with this. That's why my hat is open. Okay? And you can see the direction that this goes in. This one versus that one. I guess as a beginner, these seem fairly similar and you could confuse them. You will get used to these. So let's look at some eins in actual words. Okay, here we have words with ein in different positions. Hopefully you recognize this one at the beginning of a word. This one could be more curved and come down more, but the key thing is we can see it doesn't have the sharp break of a calf. So this is not a calf, this is an ein, and otherwise it doesn't look like anything else. Okay, and again, where are we going to hear this? On the vowel sound, right? This is ada, ada. Notice what I do is I have to stretch my throat, and then when you make the aleph with your throat stretched, you're going to get that sound. Not ada, ada. Clearly there's no ein there. And an easy way to do this is to look at a mirror and try saying this, right? So if you're saying ada, ada, there's no ein. From the throat. Ada, ada, like Arnold Schwarzenegger. Okay? With all respect to Mr. Schwarzenegger. Okay, same thing here. Okay, here it is in the middle of a word, but you're really going to hear on what it does to the vowels that come before this. And by the way, the vowel here is this, yaud, 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 right? Yaud, okay? Yaud, yaud. Okay. Now, this is for a beginning speaker. It's very hard in English for us who are used to speaking English to make a sound at the front of the mouth, go down to the throat, come back, because we're not used to doing that. So it's better to speak slowly and get used to actually pronouncing these things. If you have to pronounce them with more emphasis than a native speaker would do to get used to it, as time goes on, you'll be able to do this faster. It's like the ch sound. The more practice you have, the faster you can integrate it, but it takes time. Here's a very tricky one. This has an ein at the end. Okay, so this is the word shara. Shara, shara, okay, shara. Now, I hear it at the end, right? It's not shara, shara. Okay, it's pulling that final vowel sign down, okay? And so this word means street. At the end, it's very tricky to hear an ein. So we'll have some exercises you can practice this, but really getting used to hearing the ein and pronouncing the ein, it's an art. There is also a lot of regional variation between how hard the ein sound is pronounced. In some areas of the Arabian Gulf, Saudi Arabia, pronounced with much more emphasis than, say, in Lebanon. Hey, there's a lot of difference on this, but just be used to this. This is an actual consonant, okay? All right, well, as I said, ein is everybody's favorite letter. Probably running a close second would be ayn's cousin or brother, and that is ghayn. The good news is ghayn is going to look just like ayn, but with one dot on top. Okay, it's going to be written exactly the same, but with one dot. Good news is that's all we have is the one dot variation. No 2 or 3 dots, no dots underneath the word ghayn. This is, when this is translated into English, very often there is a GH sound, but that doesn't really capture what's going on with the ayn. Okay? Okay, so here is the writing of the ghayn. Okay, you can see it clearly. Same as ayn with just the dot. And again, I don't have an equivalent here for the soft sound of ghayn because there really isn't one. This is a very difficult sound for us as English speakers to get used to. We don't really have an equivalent, and because there is a lot of variation in this sound. The easiest way I could explain this is this sound falls between a G, a G, as in gold, girl, gain, and an R, a rolled R, R, okay, as we have in Arabic. It falls in a spectrum between those two sounds. Now, you probably never thought that those two sounds were at all close together, but actually the combination somewhere in between them gets us close to our sound, because G, when we do a G in English, if you put your hand on your throat and watch yourself, G, it's getting a guttural sound. In fact, the word guttural, okay? It does have that sound from the bottom of the throat that we're used to, G. But to get an R, right, I have to roll that, ra. If I take that ra and pull it down into my throat, which the G is going to give me, I am going to get a sound that is a combination of these two. You're going to hear echoes of G and echoes of ra in it, both together. Ra. It's kind of like a growling sound if you make a growling sound. Some people have equated it to gargling, the sound you make when you gargle, but that's, a fairly weird sound we don't make when we're speaking. But ra, rain, ra. Okay, it's referred to as a voiced ayn at times, because if I just do ayn, ra. Okay, that probably sounds hard to do. So let's look at this in some actual words, because the pronunciation is actually easier once you have it in real words. Okay. Now, as I said, the ghayn sound has sort of a combination of a G and an R sound together. Now, when we see it in actual words, we tend to get more of one or the other. Okay, so my first word here, you may be able to recognize this. Notice the ghayn. This is the capital of the country of Iraq. Okay, Iraq. The capital, okay, is Baghdad. Okay, notice when we write this in English, we use a G, Baghdad. I mean, we pronounce it from the front of the mouth, but bag, well, you see that G sound, but it's a R. Baghdad. Okay? Here we have the ghayn at the beginning of a word. Okay? At the beginning of the word, we tend to hear more of the R sound to it just because of the nature of the words. This one, I will add the short vowels on there so you recognize. Remember this, when we had the sukoon over the ya, that gave us a diphthong, an A sound. This is rare. When you hear this word pronounced, it's a very common word. It almost sounds like an R sound, almost like rare, but not from here, but rare. And this one, here I have my ghayn. Okay, put it all together. Rabbi, right? Rabbi, like a G with a R. Rabbi. Okay. All right. So these are some examples of the ayn in the ghayn. Obviously, we have exercises for you to practice with, but again, this one is more of an art. It's going to take time to get used to this. As long as you understand the concept, the more you start to see actual words, it will become more common to you and you'll get used to pronouncing it. Okay, so we'll see you back in just a little while for one more bonus, and good luck. Ma salama.